So greetings and welcome to tonight's educational program, The Quality Manager as Facilitator, a deep dive into facilitation by Zac Jarrard. This is your moderator, Doug Wood, with the ASQ's Quality Management Division. So we have the distinct pleasure tonight of hearing from Zac Jarrard. Please join me in welcoming him. Zac Jarrard is the president of Jarrard Consulting, LLC. His company is dedicated to bringing out the best in people through team building activities, project management training, and workshops to improve intergenerational communications at work. Zac holds 3 master's degrees from Park University and several certifications. His research interests include gamification, project management, and working across different generations. Outside of his company, Zac is heavily involved in the community. He's a proud ASQ senior member who serves as the past chair of the ASQ Kansas City section. Zac is an Eagle Scout who aspires to make the world a better place for everyone. And so, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Zac Jarrard. So, Zac, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. It's good to see everyone. It's hard to believe we're coming up on the end of our 3-part series on skills for Quality 4.0 and beyond. So again, it's great to see everyone. Hope you've had a good holiday or break from the past month. Without further ado, we'll dive into facilitation and then look at steering committees tonight. So for our session tonight, I'll start off. I'll define facilitation, talk about why it's important, provide some skills that you need to be an effective facilitator, talk about steering committees. I'll talk about the role facilitation can play in both of these, also in supporting projects or meetings in general at your organization. And I'll share some lessons that I've learned along the way from being a facilitator and also running steering committees. So to start off, you might wonder, well, what's the term facilitation mean? You might have heard of this. You might know some people that do some facilitation. A simple way to think about it is it's a person. They often help organize meetings or events, and they engage people. They encourage discussion. They ask people open-ended questions during one of these activities. They're focused on the bigger picture, so helping guide a group towards some kind of outcome. So it could be making a decision together, it could be doing team building, it could be a mix of them, it could be people venting, it might even be some work that needs to get done. So making sure that you hold people accountable, any of those outcomes. And what makes facilitators unique is they're really focused on the process, so making sure that they go through the right steps or they cover the right material to help the group get to that shared outcome. And they're also focused on the big picture, so making sure that the group is making progress in some way. And you know, you might wonder, well, what qualifies me to even present about this? You heard Doug speak about my background. Um, the interesting part, Doug actually inspired this presentation. So I did a talk a couple of years ago, and at the end of it, Doug came up to me and he said, "Hey, you happen to be a really good facilitator." And I was like, "What's that?" And then I looked at it, I was like, "Oh, I do happen to do some of the stuff that I discovered in the literature for facilitation." But it's interesting, the career path for facilitators is really unconventional, and it can really start in a lot of different areas. For me, I've spent years tutoring people from all over the world. So those are meetings that I've done. I've led study groups for years. In scouting, I help facilitate meetings and then train people. And then when I got into project work and consulting, and then also volunteer groups, those were more meetings and more facilitation and then speaking. So my point being that when we think about facilitators and how they can develop skills or get experience in this, there are a lot of different ways, and it's not necessarily just associated with one job title. It's really rare to find someone that has a job title of facilitator. And in a survey I saw that came out about a year or two ago, it was interesting. They had project managers on there, consultants, agile practitioners. They did have facilitators, but then also about 10 or 12 other job categories. And some examples of what you might see facilitators do, they'll often help run or coordinate meetings between different groups. They might help lead activities like team building events, or perhaps leading workshops, so doing some kind of training or whatnot. So you might wonder, why is this important to talk about? Why should we care about facilitation, having facilitators in our organization or in our groups or whatnot? Today, we live in what's called a VUCA world. If you're not sure what VUCA is, it's an acronym for volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous world. And all of that basically means that there's a lot changing in a relatively short period of time, and there's more uncertainty than there used to be in the past. And so, with that, there's a greater need for within organizations, people from different functional areas to be able to work together to solve problems. There are also more distractions than there used to be, and so we have to keep people really focused on accomplishing the goals that they're given at their organization, or even if they're working on projects or a specific initiative, making sure they don't lose sight of that. And that's also important to make sure that people feel heard, that they could share their ideas. But then on your bigger initiatives, so on your projects or your digital transformation or whatnot, it's critical that you can be able to monitor progress on those and then make adjustments. So if there are problems going on, if people have questions, if there are decisions that need to be made, that there are spaces to do that. And there's a lot of business benefits from having facilitators, developing facilitation skills within your leaders and within your organization. It can help you make the most of your time and resources, and especially time. Time is one resource we never get back. And so for me personally, I always make sure if I'm facilitating a meeting or bringing people together, that's for a very specific purpose and that we're doing the best we can to make the most of that time. So that way we're not having to reconvene again unless we decide to do that at the end of our meeting, or that we have people leave and they're like, gee, we could have handled this through an email, or we talked for an hour and we ended in a circle. We ended right where we began. Um, some other benefits, you can engage your associates. They can feel included in the conversation, and then you can tap into their ideas. So by asking questions, by giving a safe space for them to talk, they can contribute their own unique ideas, and that can help the team or even the organization pursue stuff that they might not have thought of originally. So as we think about a basic process for kind of this meeting life cycle for a team, so prior to a meeting, so developing an agenda, so thinking about what are the key points we need to cover within the time we have, and it could be 15 minutes, could be 30 minutes, 45, 60. I've even seen some meetings go for as long as 2 to 3 hours, which is really long. And for those, you probably want to build in a break so that way people can recharge kind of in between. So it's important to understand. And, even if you don't write out an agenda, just kind of having that in the back of your mind. What are some of the goals from this session we're putting together? And if you can, it's good to let people know ahead of time, even a couple days. When I facilitate meetings as the chair of the Kansas City section, I tried to send out the meeting agenda at least a couple days beforehand, sometimes a week ahead of time if I could. But again, it just kind of depends on the type of meeting you're facilitating and pulling together. You also want to look at calendars. Make sure you get on everyone's radar the day and the time that this is taking place. You don't want to have people confused or be like, hey, this wasn't on my calendar, so I wasn't able to be there. And then you want to prepare questions as well. So just as you're sending out an agenda, if you want, you could throw questions in there too. And that'd be stuff that the team might need to talk about. It might be just questions you have in general for the group to consider. And then as we arrive at the meeting, for me personally, I always think it's good to arrive early. So even for this session that you're seeing, I joined, I think it was about 20 to 30 minutes early. Now, is it realistic to be half an hour early to all your meetings? Probably not. But if you could be there perhaps 5 to 10 minutes early, it just helps make sure you're there, you're ready to go. A good place to start when you bring people together for a meeting, review the agenda you sent out or the questions. Be like, hey, it's good to see everyone. Hope you're doing well. Here are some of the key points, or here's some of the goals we have from our meeting today. And then as you're going through your agenda, ask questions, track the pace of the meeting. So make sure you're covering your key points. If you have some people that are perhaps rambling or maybe taking a little too long on some stuff, you might have to politely jump in and be like, hey, this is great that you're talking about this, or we're getting really into the weeds on details here, but we have to refocus on this. So that way you're making the most of that meeting time. And if you run over a little bit, depending on everyone's schedules, I think it's okay. I'd rather have a meeting run over and cover all of the agenda than, leave questions hanging and have to, bring everyone together again another week or two. And then it's important at the end that you summarize what was decided on. So you could say, here was the agenda we had, here's what we covered. We decided A, B, and C. This person's going to follow up on this item. This person's going to do this. I'm going to schedule the next call. We're going to try for this day and time. That way it's clear on what was accomplished, and then everyone knows what needs to happen next. Because oftentimes when you have these meetings, there's always typically action items. It's kind of rare we have a meeting where there's no follow-up required. And then afterward, so just as you reviewed what was discussed and then the next steps, at the end of the meeting, you want to send that out. So it could just be an email. Maybe it's a Word document you type up and you send to everyone. You can post that in a shared collaboration space, so in SharePoint and Google Drive, just somewhere where the team members can easily find it. And then it's important to follow up. So to make sure that the action items people committed to, that they're making active progress on it in between the meetings you have. You don't want to come to the next meeting and be like, hey, it's been 3 weeks. Did you look at this? And if they say no, then you're back at where you were the last meeting. Following up, it could be maybe a couple days after your meeting. It could be perhaps a week afterward. It just depends on the urgency and then kind of I guess the gaps that you have from one meeting to another. And then some of you might be wondering, well, what about the modality of our meetings or our events? So for face-to-face meetings, and I feel like post-pandemic, I had to relearn some of this stuff. It's critical to make sure you can reserve office spaces prior to your meeting. You don't want to double book a event space and then find out, oh, we have to go and meet out in a parking lot or whatnot. If you print copies of an agenda, make sure you have those ready. You could also post it online, or if you have a projector, you could post it on a screen where everyone could see it. And then if you have some team members, if they're running late, if they're not feeling well, or if they're not able to attend in person, see if there's a virtual option needed. So perhaps a call-in where they could be able to join. And then for virtual meetings, it's critical to make sure everyone understands how to get into your virtual meeting space. So that'd be WebEx, GoToWebinar, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, any of those tools, making sure everyone knows where to go for those. Prior to your meeting, test your audio, screen sharing, so make sure the basic mechanics work of the virtual meeting space you're using. And then it's important to monitor reactions. So when you're in virtual meetings, the interesting part is that for most people, they might not have their video on. Now, for me personally, I like to have my video on unless it's a really big meeting. So there's like, thousands or hundreds of people. In that case, I might turn it off. Or if someone's having issues with connectivity or bandwidth, when you have your video on, it's basically data that's being transferred across the internet to the virtual platform you're on. But I encourage people to have the video on. I just think it helps it feel more personal. You get to know each other a little better. But I do leave it as optional, so if people decide not to, it's fine. And for some of you here, you might wonder, well, what about a hybrid option? Like, what if you have some people that are in person and some people that are virtual? It'd really be a mix of these two. So making sure you've got your in-person event space, but then also the technology at the in-person event space to support your virtual folks as well. Um, I can say from what I've noticed about meetings post-pandemic, I know a lot of people experimented with hybrid meetings, and I think what we discovered as a whole is that it's better to either do face-to-face or virtual. I do think there's a space for hybrid meetings, but you just want to keep in mind that if you do that, you have to be able to support your in-person and your virtual attendees at the same time. And then also, I encourage you to think about the purpose. So to give you an example, there was a local conference I attended, and they had almost all their speakers attend or present virtually. And so it was a 2-day conference. So the first day of the conference, I think there were maybe 200 people that registered total. So we had about 50 people come in person. And overall, it was pretty good. There's plenty of food, so plenty of reason to be there in person. But what people discovered that day is that since almost all the speakers were virtual, there was almost no reason for them to come in person. So, um, I came back on day two. I attended this event in person, and I was the only in-person speaker on the first day, which I found out about when I was there. But on the second day, there were only about 20 people that came in person because people figured out since most of the speakers were virtual, they didn't really have a reason to come in person. So sometimes if you offer the hybrid option, you also have to add in an incentive or look at the why for people attending in person. And so you might wonder, well, what are some of the skills that I need to develop or at least consider to be an effective facilitator? The first one is being able to influence people, and that's where charisma comes into play. And this involves relatability, being able to inspire others, being empathetic, so showing people that you care about them. And what I think is interesting about charisma, but also influence, is that you can develop this over time. Um, when most people are born, they're not super charismatic. Over time, they learn to ask questions, they learn to express positive emotions, to be optimistic, get people excited. They learn to care about other people. Those are skills that you can develop as well that can help you be more effective at running meetings or activities or events. And then there's also influence. So being able to um, have people listen to you, to be able to get people to participate in decision making or, influence their thinking or whatnot. Some ways to build influence. So you want to develop relationships with people, so get to know people on a deeper level. Just asking them questions, getting to know them personally. In some of your organizations, it probably just comes naturally from the time you spend working with other people. If you can get out of your functional area, so if there's like a Christmas party or holiday party or some of these events where it brings the whole organization together, meeting people from different functions, that's a way to build your influence kind of at a bigger level. But also looking at the customs and traditions. So attending that annual holiday party or looking at how people dress, how people speak to each other, how they act, examining, respecting some of those customs and traditions that can help build influence, but then also making sure that you're being consistent with your behavior. So some people call this walk the talk or set a good example. So for example, as a facilitator, showing up to meetings a few minutes early, being humble, holding yourself accountable. So if you commit to doing certain things from one meeting to another, you do them. those are ways that you build your credibility, and then you encourage people to follow your example that you have. And then another skill that's critical is active listening. This is where this goes beyond just basic listening skills. It's where you listen to what someone says, and then you prove to them that you heard them. um, some ways to do this: so asking people questions, summarizing what they had said to you, even if you don't get right the first time. I've had this happen sometimes. I've been talking to people, and I've tried to summarize some points, and they're like, well, I really meant this, or you missed that. And so then I'll say it back to them a second time. They'll be like, oh, yep, you got it right that time. So keep in mind on this part, you don't have to be perfect. Do the best you can. Sometimes you do have to ask a couple questions, or perhaps write a summary, or share a summary once or twice. But again, taking the time to do that, make sure that you've done the best you can, and then that way you get it right, or you get as close to it as you can. And then being present in the moment, that's another critical piece. With all the distractions we have today, it's really hard to do that. And really, I think it's a challenge in a lot of our organizations. We have all this technology, we have notifications. A lot of it's designed to pull our attention away from stuff. And so keeping people focused, for example, right now, like if I was playing on my phone while uh, we were doing this presentation, you probably wouldn't think I had a lot of credibility. So, doing small stuff like that helps you make sure that you're present in the moment, and then people truly feel like you are listening to them, or at least trying to. And some key points, taking notes. So one of the areas I also help people in, outside of my business with tutoring, is doing job interviews. And I tell people, if you bring a notebook, if you take notes, people think that you're detail oriented, but then it also helps you remember. So it also helps you summarize what people have said during a session. So follow up, so ask questions, and then do what you can to eliminate or reduce distractions that people have. And sometimes if you're in a meeting like this, and you're on Zoom or WebEx and people are quiet, throw questions at them, or be like, hey, I see that you're here, or this question relates to, ABC person. Can you come off mute? Can you provide some clarity on this point? It's okay to pull people into the conversation, so that way you can make sure they're paying attention. And if they need a second, I've had some times where people have been on virtual calls, and they'll come off mute. They'll be like, "I'm sorry, I've been multitasking. Can you restate the question?" That's fine to do that, but making sure you can do what you can to reduce distractions goes a long way toward active listening, and then getting toward decisions or action items that need to be done. And then another important skill is being able to engage your team, and even just doing small team building activities within a meeting. Taking a minute to recognize people if you know their birthday's coming up, their work anniversary, some other significant milestone. You could even share something that you're excited about. So if you find out that someone enjoys being in the outdoors, or they like to travel, or they're passionate about architecture, having them talk about those little things, those hobbies, helps build your credibility and your charisma to some extent. Sharing random facts as well. There were some meetings that I facilitated recently. It was a series of daily meetings, so it happened pretty much once a day, Monday through Friday, for a whole month. It was 15-minute check-in calls with everyone. Um, they asked me to facilitate it, and I knew that everyone was really stressed out. We were asking them to do a lot of work, and so we didn't have it in the script, but I thought, why don't we do something fun? So I would take a few minutes before our call, and I would look up random holidays that were occurring during our meetings, and I would be like, hey, today's National Iced Tea Day, or did you know today's National Catfish Day? There was one day, I think it was the Catfish Day. I told them, I'm like, In case you didn't know, today's National Catfish Day and also National Strawberry Parfait Day. And so one of the team members was like, catfish and strawberry parfait, probably not a good idea to eat those together. And I told them, I'm like, yep, you're right. But sharing that random fact, it brought some joy into the team, and it was something fun. And being that I knew that they were under a lot of stress, it was just a way to kind of get them energized and excited for what they need to do for the day. Even asking them top 5 questions. So, top 5 movies they've seen, top 5 TV series, top 5 books. Those go a long way toward building your team and then getting them excited about the work that you're probably asking them to do or someone in the meeting is. And there's benefits from doing this. So, getting your team excited, having them feel engaged, building trust, improving your overall communication with the team, helping build a sense of vulnerability, and then creating that team-oriented culture where they feel like it's all of them together, not just one individual. And yes, so just as I talked about the positive aspect of engaging your team, there are cases where conflict occurs, and really to some extent, a healthy amount of conflict is good. It can help bring out new ideas from people. Might protect you from making a bad decision. Where conflict is bad is where it's not managed effectively. And so a framework that I learned about from scouting that helps address conflict, it's called the EAR method. And so EAR is an acronym. It stands for express, address, and resolve. So express is the first part of it. So let's say you've got 2 different parties. You have each of them in the express phase, you have them share kind of their thoughts on an issue that they're facing. So kind of how they each see it. Then once they've done that, you try to find, well, what's the root cause or the root causes of this problem. So you might have a facilitator, a manager come in. They'll listen to each point of view and then see, well, what's really the problem that we have here. And then once that is done, they will work with the team to help resolve the conflict. And ideally, there would be a team-oriented solution. So trying to go for a win-win situation where both parties can walk away in a positive way. Now, keep in mind that that's ideal, but in reality, it's not always possible to get a win-win situation. And sometimes that's okay. It just depends on the situation that you're in. And some other points to think about in terms of conflict that might happen. It's important to make sure that people feel like they have the space to feel heard, even if what they're saying is wrong. Even sometimes if they need a minute to ramble. I had someone I worked with recently. Um, they were a really nice person, but they would get way into the weeds too much. And so I had to learn, sometimes I had to just let them speak a little bit, and I had to jump in and be like, hey, this is great that you're talking about this, but we have to refocus. Or I'd be like, this is great, but let's get back on topic, or let's come back to this main point, or say something like, I appreciate what you said, but this isn't really relevant to where we're trying to go in this meeting. You want to engage the team too. So if you've got different parties, if they're in that express phase where they're sharing different perspectives, and then you identify the root cause, see if the project team or maybe even your team that you work with on a day-to-day basis, maybe they have some ideas to help solve a given problem, or maybe they could provide outside or kind of neutral perspective to help resolve it. And then there are cases, so you do what you can as a facilitator. Um, the parties involved, they're still having conflicts. Your conflict is escalated to a point that you've done all the stuff you can, and it hasn't worked. Then you would want to escalate that issue to someone else. So it'd be perhaps a different manager. It might be a project sponsor if it's on a project team. But making sure as a facilitator, you escalating that's critical, because then at that point you're handing it off to someone else. You don't want to leave conflict kind of simmering or hanging for too long unresolved. Okay, so now that we've gone through some basic facilitation skills, now we'll talk about this is kind of facilitation at a bigger level where the stakes are a little bit higher than just one meeting or activity. This would be for steering committees. And so, in case you haven't heard of steering committees, so the purpose of them, it's to help engage multiple stakeholder groups, and then it could be senior managers or a series of advisors on a project or perhaps a really large initiative going on at organization. And it's supposed to be kind of like a bridge between your team that's doing day-to-day work, but then also your sponsors or your senior managers that are providing resources to support what the team is doing. And then this also helps at an enterprise level provide transparency into what's going on, so making sure your senior managers or advisors are engaged, but then also knock down obstacles. If you're working on stuff at a smaller level, sometimes you can give obstacles a little more time to work themselves out, or you just reach out to a manager or just one sponsor. But if you're working on something really big, so a digital transformation, changing a process that affects the way that everyone works in an enterprise, those are obstacles that often require a great sense of urgency, but then also you need those senior managers involved to get those addressed very quickly or in a timely manner. And the advisors on that need to be able to know that those need to be knocked down quickly, or else it'll get in the way. Some examples of where steering committees could be helpful in an organization: you're bringing in a new IT system, so you're getting rid of a legacy system that you've had. You might have a project that cuts across more than two cross-functional areas, so it might involve 5, 6, 10, maybe even all the departments of your organization. Or it could be a significant investment, so it could be a multi-million dollar, maybe even $1 billion or multi-billion-dollar project, or perhaps a product you're working on developing. And you might wonder, why are these committees important? For some of you, you might not have worked with steering committees, and that's fine. But again, it comes down to having that transparency and what's going on in this large initiative, and then having your senior managers or your sponsors involved on a periodic basis, and then making sure there's that focus. So earlier I talked about distractions that could get in the way of a meeting. The same could happen at an enterprise level. And so keeping them focused on achieving those outcomes they're going to get to is critical. And then addressing your risks and then obstacles, and realizing that it's not just one person that's responsible for those, it's the organization, and often multiple people or multiple teams or departments that can help address that in a more holistic way. And then some of the other benefits from having steering committees: you get deeper stakeholder engagement. You can monitor your team progress, and then your senior managers know where you are almost more in real time. And then this it helps improve your mitigation. So that way, if there are risks that come up and the team recommends steps to take, or managers recommend steps to take to address them, they're addressed very quickly. So as we think about facilitation and steering committees, it's a little different than facilitating just a regular meeting or event. So as we think about preparing for a steering committee, um, if it's your first time doing this, you want to develop a brief presentation, and you could have one of the senior managers that's interested in steering committees help you with this. But bring your group together and help explain the purpose of the committee and what their role is. And make sure you're really intentional about the advisors and the senior managers that you involve on the committee, because you want to make sure that they each have a role, and they're representative of the stakeholder groups that are affected by this initiative. And then you want to work closely with administrative assistants, or it might be the gatekeepers to the senior manager's schedules, to be able to help coordinate scheduling these meetings. It's often more complicated because for senior managers, they usually have more going on their calendar versus mid or lower level employees. And then it's really important, you want to prepare questions for them, but then also if you're running into problems, you want to be able to provide recommendations for how to solve them. So if you're in one of these meetings, to be able to say, hey, here's an obstacle the team found. Here are 3 recommendations for how to solve it. What are your thoughts on this? Do you have additional questions? Because again, that helps resolve those issues very quickly versus having the steering committee, kind of get hung up on it during the meeting. And then during the steering meeting, so again, this is more kind of on the first one. You want to establish that meeting cadence, so have them meet maybe once a month, once a quarter, provide updates to them on what's gone on since the last meeting, ask questions. You especially want to track the time because for a lot of these people, they're really busy. And so once the meeting's over, uh, they'll have to run to put out other fires or do other stuff. So staying within time is probably more critical for your steering committees. And at the end, you still want to summarize what was discussed, provide the list of next steps and action items. And then after the meeting, you want to send out some meeting minutes or documentation, probably something a little more formal than just a regular meeting, and send that to the entire steering committee so they could review it. You want to post it in a shared space. It could be a digital space like SharePoint or Google Drive. And then it's important, just as you would follow up from another meeting or activity, that you do the same with the steering group. So you might have to work with some of the committee members, maybe reach back out to some of your team members as needed. But that helps complete that loop. So that way you don't have another steering meeting in 1 or 2 months and then there's no progress made on those items. That would be kind of a nightmare for a facilitator. Okay, and then shifting gears, I do have a couple examples I prepared. So one example, this applies more on the facilitation side, um, just doing basic meetings. So when I became the chair of the Kansas City section, we have monthly board meetings that we did. So I helped organize those. I sent out a calendar invite for the whole year. So we met, I think it was like the second Thursday. I think it was like 6:30 to 7:30 or 6:30 to 8 Central Time. I worked with the co-chair and some of the other board members to develop an agenda. I would try to send that out several days, sometimes a week in advance if I could. And a big focus that we had, so areas we were trying to improve on, making sure we could deliver a program, so virtual and in person, but then also trying to improve our virtual or our MySQ engagement and some of the key outcomes. So from taking the time to send those agendas out ahead of time, uh, being effective at facilitating these meetings, making sure we had good follow-up. We had a greater sense of transparency so everyone knew what was going on, what was coming up, what we were trying to work on. We stayed within time, so within about 60 to 90 minutes. We built a positive culture along the way. So I'd ask people, what's fun stuff you have coming up in the next month, or if people have birthdays or significant milestones, we would take some time to celebrate those. And then having those standing agenda items of doing programs, virtual or MySQ engagement, activities coming up in the next month, questions for the regional meetings, helped us do better overall planning as a section for about a 2-year time span, and probably even still today to some extent. And then an example that relates back to steering committees. So I was working on, so with higher education, a project to improve degree planning and audits for higher education students. So I helped create a steering committee to provide executive oversight into what was going on, and then also ran several of these meetings, so to help bring the sponsors together on what the team was doing. And some of the key outcomes from this, from helping coordinate this steering committee, we had our executives very engaged. This was something they were not used to, but they really appreciated it. We also had our team members engaged, and they also knew what issues would be discussed with the executives. So, as the facilitator for a steering committee, oftentimes you're the bridge between the team members, so the people doing the work day to day, but then also the executives who want to be able to hear progress on it or hear that they're getting close to their desired outcome that they're looking for. We mitigated several risks that came up on this initiative, and then we created accountability at an organizational level for this initiative. So that way, it wasn't just me or one department helping do risk mitigation. It was everyone, multiple stakeholder groups helping coordinate and be able to be ready to address certain risks on the initiative. Okay, so you've heard me talk a lot about facilitation, some of the skills to develop, steering committees. Now it's your turn. I'd like for you to take a second and think about this scenario, and feel free, you can post in the chat. And I've had this happen before. So imagine that you're a facilitator. You've been asked to organize a meeting with some different groups at your organization, and the people they're coming to this meeting, they're discussing a topic that's very sensitive, where people have, very strong opinions, and they're not 100% sure on what needs to be covered. But you know that with this sensitive topic they're talking about, there's a decision that needs to be made. Um, so the team has to reach some kind of consensus. So I'd encourage you, take a minute or two. I want you to post in the chat what you could do to help prepare and help facilitate this type of meeting. And I put this in as an example because this really does happen, where sometimes we have these high stakes or difficult meetings come up, and we have to participate, or we have to be ready to be able to do the best we can to help our team be successful, even if there is disagreement among them. Okay, so I'm seeing, so define objectives, putting down ground rules. Okay, talking with some of the stakeholders is good ahead of time. Define the purpose. Yep, making a problem statement is good. Have a pre-meeting. Yep, you could do that. Kind of a check-in. Okay, you could agree on a framework for making decisions. That could be good. Okay, look at who's in the room. That's good. Yep, reiterate the information will be discussed. Excellent. So as we think about difficult meetings, so beforehand, so just as we would for any other activity or a steering committee meeting, we would want to take some time to develop an agenda and send that out ahead of time. Um, make sure you have the right people in the room, so get it on everyone's calendars. And then going into the meeting, it's important for you as a facilitator to have a positive, but also outcome-based mindset. And I saw someone say bringing snacks. If you're doing an in-person meeting, that's definitely a good idea. Bringing in some snacks, maybe some water. Um, that might be something to help diffuse a little bit of the tension, or make the stakes a little bit lower during the meeting. So you want to try to stay within time. If you have some people that ramble, you have to find a way to cut them off, or perhaps to limit discussion. Maybe you give each person 1 or 2 minutes to share their point of view, and then you go to the next person. And if you're doing that, you want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to have their say and then not be interrupted. Also, taking notes be good. And then the key part on some of these difficult meetings is making sure that everyone feels heard, even if their idea is not executed or people disagree with them. As long as they feel heard, there'll be a better chance that they'll buy into that end solution that the team ultimately decides on. It's almost kind of like venting. Like if they feel like they can say what they need to, or their piece, it's almost like it's out of their system, and then they can refocus on the problem or buy in to whatever the team decides on. And then after the meeting, so providing that summary, documenting what was decided, following up with appropriate people or parties or departments. But then for you as the facilitator, maybe even the team, it's okay to take a break. So, go outside, go walk for a minute, um, get a drink of water, take some deep breaths. That's okay, because sometimes for your mental health as a facilitator, you might need a few minutes to kind of reset or recharge, and that's fine if you need to do that. Maybe even if you get the chance, maybe end the meeting a few minutes early. Give people some time back if you can. Um, People love that. All right, and then here's one other scenario that we'll work through together. So again, kind of similar to the first one. We'll do about a couple minutes in the chat. Um, so imagine, so you're at an organization, they've got this legacy system that is not working very well. They have a big project to replace it, and they need to have oversight, coordination. There's got to be visibility into what's going on. So does anyone have thoughts on this? This one relates more to the steering committee example. This has taken on my life. Yep. Again, these are based on real scenarios that happen. Okay, so know the stakeholders, seeing a lot of defined requirements. That's good. A work breakdown structure might be good. Okay, so maybe you have a program and then you break it up into smaller projects. Have a project lead, maybe even have a program or portfolio manager too to help coordinate this. Milestones, that's good. Communication and change management plans, that's good. So for the sake of time, I'm gonna keep this going. So as we think about project governance more at an enterprise level, thinking about our stakeholders is key. So developing a stakeholder register. So thinking about what groups need to be involved, what are some of the concerns they might have, or what are they excited about related to this initiative? And then is this a use case where having a steering committee might be valuable? So having those group of advisors or groups representing the different stakeholders meet on a quarterly or a monthly basis to help resolve problems or at least be aware of what's going on. And then you also want to think about risk. And from the ISO 31000, they talk about so it's the effect that uncertainties might have on what you're trying to do, and it could be stuff that could go wrong. So what are uncertainties that could happen that might be negative? But then you also want to think about what stuff that could go really well. So, we put this new system in, we do the digital transformation, we free up people's time to do other work, or they have more visibility into a process that's going on. But then at an enterprise level, you also want to think about not just how does a project team mitigate risk, but how's the organization as a whole address risk if you're working on a big initiative. And as I step back, as I look back at my experience as a facilitator and helping put meetings together, I've found some stuff that's been helpful. So having recurring meetings on the calendar and sending those out in it far in advance. Sometimes I've sent meeting invites out, up to 12 months out. I have it on people's calendar. Um, Take notes. Make sure you restate what people say. Do the best you can. If you have to restate it again or update your notes or whatnot, that's fine. And then be open. See what ideas your team members have. They might have ideas to help improve your meetings or help improve the flow of what's getting done or just the work in general. And then for steering committees, it's important to build relationships with the gatekeepers to the senior managers, so the administrative assistants. In case you didn't know, there's a administrative professionals week. It's usually the last full week of April. If you know an administrative assistant, make sure you recognize them that week. And then Administrative Professionals Day, it's usually the Wednesday of that week. I think it's the last Wednesday of the last full week of April every year. It's important. So as you're developing updates for the steering group, you want to engage the people that are on the ground doing the work, the project team. So that way they've got input, they can share concerns, they feel like they're heard. And then to the steering group, you want to be transparent about what's going on. So if there's issues going on, you want to make sure they know. There are risks that have come up, but you also want to make sure you talk with the team about how to address those. So you don't want to just go to a steering group and be like, hey, here's all this stuff that's going wrong. They'll want to hear your thoughts on how to address some of it, and they might have ideas as well that could help. And here are some additional resources. Again, I'm happy to send links. A lot of these are books or articles. So the first one, The Art of Gathering, it's a really good book on facilitation. There's two other articles there that are really good. For steering committees, there's a couple listed as well. I even used some of those as I thought about how to kick off steering groups from my past work experience. And then here are the takeaways from our sessions. So I'm hoping from attending this session, you got to learn a little bit more about facilitation, about some of the key skills you need, looking at steering committees, what role these could play in projects or meetings, but then also sharing some of the lessons I've learned from being a facilitator, from helping put on steering committee meetings, but also dealing with difficult meetings. Because I think that's stuff that we often have to face, probably more than we want to. And then here's my contact information. I'm really active on LinkedIn. Be more than happy to connect. As Doug had mentioned at the beginning, I'm happy to send out a copy of the presentation. I can send you some links if you want that could help. But thanks for attending this webinar, for listening to the recording. I'd be more than happy to connect with you. And just want to give a big thanks to the Quality Management Division. This is the end of our three-part series, so I hope that all of you enjoyed it. If you're listening to the recording, go check out the first talk we did on virtual teams and then risk management. And then want to give kind of a final thanks to Doug and Shoba for helping coordinate this, but especially Doug. Without him, this talk wouldn't have been possible.
Well, thank you, Zach. Uh, we've certainly collected a number of questions. Uh, we're going to stop the recording at this point because again, we're going to go over some questions. Want to make sure that